Have you ever wondered why your favorite taco is costing you an arm and a leg these days? Or is your dream couch still in back order status for months now? Join us as we go behind the scenes of the global supply chain. Let us discuss and understand its complexity and learn from the industry leaders, professionals, and subject matter experts. Expect in-depth analysis and genuine conversations about the major issues affecting the supply chain today. Welcome to Supply Chain Demystified. Your host is none other than the distinguished supply chain expert, Dr. Nick Vyas. Professor Vyas is the Academic Director of USC Marshall Global Supply Chain Management and Founding Executive Director of USC Marshall Randall R. Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute.
Welcome to Supply Chain Demystified. I'm your host, Professor Nick Vyas. Each episode features conversations with industry leaders and experts exploring the best practices and game-changing innovations on emerging trends and the challenges that redefine supply chain and organizations today. In this episode, we'll discuss the transformative power of digital innovations and its profound influence on individual and businesses alike. Join us as we explore how emerging technologies such as AI are revolutionizing the industry and reshaping the future of global trade. Joining us today is the visionary founder and CEO of Mindgrub Technology, a leader in a cutting-edge digital solution. He's a three-time most admired CEO, two times EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, member of Baltimore Magazine's 40 Under 40, Maryland's Tech Council's 2022 CEO of the Year, and the Daily Record's Innovator of the Year. The founder and CEO of Mindgrub Technologies. Everyone, let's welcome Todd Marks. Todd, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nick. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Listen, so Mindgrub, you've been in the Inc. magazine 5000 club for 10 years. Your tagline, which I love, by the way, human first innovations for the digital world. Why don't we talk, let's start with that.
Yeah,
Define
absolutely.
our viewer, what does that mean, human first innovation for the digital world?
Yeah, well, a little background. I started as a high school math and computer science teacher in the late 90s. And when it comes to being a teacher, you're really a guide, and helping to mentor students. And it's really a human-centric approach when it talks about teaching. Well, I got into technology at the turn of the century during the dot-com. And I took that approach of being very human-centric, and I translated that into my software pursuits. So Mindgrub, we make and market software for clients. We've been known as an innovation agency, but ultimately we have a really strong focus on technology, innovation, and user-centered design.
Okay, so I think this is really a very important topic, and we're going to get into these things. But the human-centric design, which is such a beautiful concept, and it's been really talked through for decades. So if you can, just give me a quick example. If you were designing a solution for a particular use case.
Yeah.
What's the difference between what would be the CAN approach?
User-centered design, just to talk a little forward thinking, is nobody likes to pay their bills, right? And every month, if you haven't automated your bills or you're still paying by check, but no matter, all of that can be automated these days. So if nobody likes doing something, it's a really bad experience, like paying your bills. Why don't the bots just do it for us these days? That'd be very human-centric. The nuts and bolts of it, though, if you look at a website, it's, should I put the menu here? Should I have a form field here? Should I use high contrast colors? Right? And it's trying to make an experience that's a good experience for users, whether it's a website or whether it's, AI agents.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. So, you have a very interesting background. So let's get into it. I think a high school teacher, right? I mean, and you've been at it, this entrepreneurial journey, which is really very interesting transitions. And I want to walk through that roadmap of your personal journey.
Sure.
What got you into the teaching, and then how did you transition into being an entrepreneur? Because this is a path many of my students, they often wants to take, and they ask me this question, right?
Yeah.
What is that path looks like, and how do you one goes from one end to the other end of the spectrum?
Yeah, I encounter a lot of people that are, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a businessman. And what maybe they fail to understand is most of the time it's out of necessity. That's great that you have ambitions to start a business, but it's the most difficult thing you could do in your life. And, 95% fail within the first 5 years. So it's generally not something that people start out to do. In my case, it was really, the alignment of the stars. I had my 10,000 hours, if you've read the book Outlier.
Yep.
And so I really started hiring for Mindgrub in 2008, despite starting the company in 2002, and I can talk about that a bit. I had a real need because I was working for um, a big consulting group, and I was going back and forth to Chicago and Austin, and my family was here, and frankly, kind of falling apart a little bit. And then ultimately, massive disruption. So in 2008, that's when they released the iPhone SDK, and I knew at that point I had a lot of experience. I had to come home. I wanted to get a company going, and so ultimately we started making mobile apps. It was, although probably my third or fourth, um, venture into business. I started out in the 90s as a high school teacher, and the reason I did that is because I wanted my summers off. I wanted to kayak and climb. I was a semi-professional kayaker at the time, and my kayaking buddy showed me something called Macromedia Flash. They had just bought this product called Future Splash. It became Macromedia Flash, and then later became Adobe Flash until, Steve Jobs killed it in favor of JavaScript. But in 99, 2000, we saw Flash for the first time, and you could have a web experience where you didn't have to refresh the browser by clicking on a link and having that HTML load another page. We said, this is amazing. You can create e-learning with this. You can create games. You can create immersive experiences. So we started our first company in 99. We made it 2 years till September 11th. I then started Mindgrub in 2002 and didn't necessarily get the growth or scale I was looking for. It was myself. I couldn't figure out how to get a third person on a contract. I started another company in 2005 around Windows Mobile, but as we know, that platform never really took off. Finally, in 2008, 10,000 hours, the need to stay home, and massive disruption around the iPhone. And finally, third time's a charm. And I really started running with Mindgrub Technologies. And from that point on, once we hit our first million, we went 10 years Inc. 5000.
Fantastic, Todd. So this is a journey, and I often, this is not well written about it, research about it, but you say the third time is a charm. So, but one has to be able to succumb to a couple of punches, I mean, gut punches and being knocked off your feet before you truly find the strength to get back up and find the winner. So just walk
You got
us
that
through
right.
what is that feeling?
Well, a lot of people say fail fast. I don't think any of it's a failure. I mean, I'm a lifelong learner, so it's, more education over and over and over again. I recently got into venture capital, and you start out and you invest in a company, you're like, "Oh, this guy's got a great idea." Later you learn, and well, one person, it takes a village. So you're like, these three individuals have a great idea. Then you realize it's not the idea's execution. You say, well, these three individuals are now post revenue. Then you later find out these individuals have exited a previous business. They've started this up with their own capital. They're highly invested. They're really skilled. They have their 10,000 hours, and they're now cannibalizing a massive disruption, right? So until you've taken some licks, right? If we're talking boxing metaphors here, until you've taken some licks, you really don't know what it takes to fully execute, at 110%, which is what it takes to grow a business. So you have to try and fail, and you have to try again and get back up, right? I mean, there's, how many rounds in boxing, I guess, until you get a, knockout, or until you hit, 8 rounds. And so you just have to try and try again. In my case, it took 3 rounds, and Mindgrub itself took off like a rocket ship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The wisdom that I share with my students in the classrooms and the students that I mentor is a very deep rooted wisdom from the East, where you focus on your actions and don't get attached to the outcome. And if you do that, outcome really comes up in its full fruition. But if your focus should be in your actions without worrying about being knocked off or being a winner, if you just focus on those punches one at a time, I think you'll do much better. But so let's talk about something that's very interesting that you have in your journey. 1999, right? We are at the inflection point of a dot-com, right? The world started living in a cloud. I mean, this was a huge paradigm shift. In fact, a paradigm break for the humanity, where what we started to think about the big frame and having on-site, on-prem servers and those things. That whole transformation, if we look at it, the bust of the dot-com in 2000 all the way to now. Todd, give us a sense. How do you see the evolution of this technology to the current state where we are now talking about regen AI and agentic AI?
Yeah, well, if you go back, in history in general, right, we were an agrarian society and everybody worked in the farm fields. And then all of a sudden the Industrial Revolution came around and people worked in, warehouses. And that was the invention of this modern day school system, as a 160-year-old model based on the Industrial Revolution. And that was to train people to work in warehouses, frankly. And it was ringing bells and move on to the next step. Well, then we had, the digital transformation or digital era. It became the communication era. Now this next era that we're moving into is the agentic era. And there's a lot of stuff that we do as humans that are repetitive tasks that are based on this 160 plus year old model to create factory workers. And those repetitive tasks now can be absolutely done by AI and automation and machines. And so what does that free us up to do? It frees us up to be the strategic thinkers, to see around the corner, to focus on the humanities, which is really interesting. As you take away some of the repetitive tasks, we can now be more creative, more autistic, more poetic. And so, as technology progresses, we thought technology was, the cutting edge, and it's still the cutting edge. It's going to take away the mundane, the repetitive tasks, frankly, the stuff we don't want to do. So I'm excited for this next era because, I'm not longing the days when we're all farmers wondering, that the Industrial Revolution is going to put people out of work. I'm excited for it to take all that, crap work off our plates and free us up to do all the strategic thinking that I've always wanted to spend my time doing.
So I think so, but you would agree, Todd, right? So I mean, from when we talk about the digital age, big frame and the personal computers, all the way to where we are today. Would you agree where we are today, and we start to talk about the agentic AI and its influence on the power? I think it's a very exciting space, but I want to really hear your perspective on how this is going to help the supply chain industry and what use cases you see that this could be a great benefit.
Yeah, the supply chain's been using AI for years, and it started with machine learning, big data sets, algorithmic processes. And so an example, we've built a lot of mobile apps for Black & Decker over the years, and Black & Decker obviously has a huge supply chain. Well, probably 10 years ago, we were talking to them about a project where they were pulling weather data and inventory data, and then based on weather patterns, if it was going to lead to potential hurricanes, tropical storms, basically those events that mean people run to the store and they buy plywood, hammers and nails, or screws and drills, right? If they know they're going to have this weather event that's going to cause a rush on the store, well, now they can proactively look at inventory levels at that store and then reship new product down there if their inventory is getting low ahead of the storm. And so that was some machine learning, way back in the day. It's only now we're all talking about AI because of, ChatGPT from a couple of years ago, but it actually came out in the 50s. People started doing some early, adoption, early invention with AI. So supply chain's been using it for, predictive analytics, even like predictive maintenance, inventory. When you actually get into the warehouse itself, think about Amazon right now and the sheer number of robots that they have moving boxes around. All that's powered by AI.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. A few months ago, I wrote on LinkedIn about the AI and automation and how the level of industry 2.0 technologies in America's warehouse is still low compared to the other sector. The
Oh, the
push to
adoption of
see,
AI?
well, adoption of the AI in a commercial term, an industrial term, right? And the push really received huge blowback from people who were worried about the impact of automation and the job in the industry. How do you see the relations between AI and automation and then human capital, the jobs, particularly within the supply chain in the US?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a double problem, right? Because we have to employ our human capital, and the government now is being looked at as being bloated and needing to shrink, right? I have a friend that works on oil rigs, and he said an oil rig used to have 150 people all over the place, and now it's like two guys that are on the oil rig because there's robots all over the place. Even his job, which is to inspect like deep wells, he can fly a drone in there now. And he's trying to figure out how do you automate the drone flying in the deep well and doing visual inspection of maintenance equipment. So, it goes back to, again, at one point in time, we were all farmers, right? And, now like agriculture is still the number one industry in my state of Maryland, agriculture and fishing, number one. That said, number two is healthcare, right? Still really important. A lot of humans involved with that, although the number one consumer of AI is healthcare. And then you get into three, which is like cyber, other technology, and manufacturing, right? So there's all these industries that didn't even exist back in the day when we were all farmers, and now those jobs exist. So although we don't know what the next jobs necessarily look like, if we can free ourselves up from doing the mundane things, right? Like there's still humans that copy here and paste there. Think about librarians, right? You used to have to go to the library, go through the card catalog, or get frustrated, talk to the librarian. A human walks over and goes through the card catalog, finds the Dewey Decimal Number, and then walks you over to the bookshelf and spends all this time. Right now, those books are just digital and you can just search for them, right? And I don't know that there's still a place for librarians, right? Maybe not as many as we had, but now those same librarians, they're so good with information. A big part of AI is really information sciences, not just computer science, not just human-centered computing, but information science. So those same librarians might not be moving books around on a shelf with a Dewey Decimal System, but now they can help organize data sets, look at big data, and empower AI to be, more efficient. It's really about humans working with AI as opposed to, unfortunately, the humans that are going to get left behind are those that don't work with AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Todd. So, my perspective on this whole human capital concerns, because I'm an eternal optimist. And I said a couple centuries ago, I mean, your job and my job and our ancestral job was hunters and gatherers. And that never stopped. It was a 24/7 job. I mean, you have to protect yourself. Sun sets and then you sunrise and you go right at it, right?
Yeah, all
And
day.
when we get into the agricultural society where it becomes sophisticated, we still work 7 days on the farms. Industrial revolutions on the onset, it was about 6 7 days of work weeks in which you typically would have worked 60 hours to now we call 40 hours of work week. So when I imagine us really being integrated with this advanced stack of technologies, maybe we only need to work as a humans 20 to 24 hours. Maybe that's the
Yeah,
reality.
maybe we don't even work.
And-
Maybe at the end of the day, it's not a set 40 hours, right? That's still based on the Industrial Revolution of start bell, stop bell, right? That's what school is.
Correct.
Start class, stop class, right? Instead of thinking of it as hours, you think of it as work product. And
That's right.
when the machinery automates the production of the work product, then it's our brains. And so, if you can watch a TV show and meanwhile you're thinking through issues and problem solving for humanity, and that work product has value, you can get paid. But did I drive somewhere and report to an office? No. I basically was connected to the internet and I thought within my brain and created solutions to problems that people are willing to pay for. And now I've done work without working. I mean, that's essentially what we're getting to. We're going to have to get to a credit-based system at some point, based on, merit and basic subsidy, but not a set 40-hour work schedule. That'll go away pretty
Absolutely.
quick.
Absolutely. And when I see this, right, because when I look at it, like you talked about the medical industry, we are living longer. right? But how do you intelligently solve the problems that humanity has faced, where average lifespan used to be 62 years, uh, to now we're looking at almost 78, right? To maintain that, we have to have an adaptation of all of these tools available to us. And so, yes, the fear is always there. When the tractor came, we thought we're gonna have all these farmers bankrupt and we're gonna destroy. Well, guess what? The output of the agricultural society is feeding 7.5 billion people, right? Which is 2.5 times more than what the population was just about 120 years ago.
Well, talk about supply chain problems. We actually have more than enough food. But the reason we have, impoverished people who, don't eat enough, and particularly more third world countries, it's actually a supply chain issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree completely, and especially the cold chain. And we can actually have a separate podcast on this issue about it's not the resource issue, but it's allocate movements of the resources,
Right.
the right
Distribution,
place, right
economic.
place at the right time, the distribution issues. That is actually, and I'm really optimist that through these innovations and technology usage, that we will be able to solve those problems. Remember, our last 40 years, through digital transformations, we have uplifted close to 1.8 billion people from extreme poverty to the
Right.
consumer class, right? Uh, and that is we don't often talk about this in the media. There's always this doom and gloom. But when you start to think about where we were and where we are now and where we are going, I think one has to reflect that it has, an
Absolutely.
incredibly positive transformation.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were trying to say if COVID was as bad as the bubonic plague, right? Now, in the bubonic plague, I think a third of the world's population died, right? Now, if you had like, a study, is one worse than the other? The difference is in modern day medicine, there, some people would argue we overreacted in some cases, but a third of our population didn't die, right? We were able to get the word out there, get masks, find vaccines right away, right? Much quicker pace than the bubonic plague, right? And so, that innovation is problem solving that much faster. And, we wondered if it was a medieval times due to COVID, would a third of people have lost their lives and maybe more, who knows, right? It
Exactly.
went really rampant around the earth, you know.
Absolutely. 162 countries were disrupted. In spite, there was no discrimination about socioeconomic status, race, religion, or the continent.
Right.
The world, I mean, right, this is a pandemic, did not discriminate anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to invent an alien that says, we're gonna wipe out anybody on the earth that doesn't have a, body mass index of at least 5%. And you wouldn't believe everybody would be fed instantly. You know what I mean? If we just had this extraterrestrial issue that united us like COVID did to go problem solve, right? And that's what we need to get to. It's the humanity aspect of it all. Like we should solve, hunger issues, right? And if we can get enough people behind with AI, now we'll have that next leap that we can solve some of those major problems. Cancer, just a matter of time.
Absolutely.
Now if you take quantum and you take AI, no problem. We're going to solve cancer
Yeah.
finally between those two technologies, plus a human.
And I think, and to that point, I think the future that we're looking at it, and this is why I want my listeners and the humanity to be really excited about it, is that the medicine also has been very generic. We've been just fire hosing our way through the diseases, like that each of us are the same. No, our DNA, our genetics, our at the micro level, we all have a different need. So maybe there's a future of medicine in which looks at it and customizes and treats each of
Well,
us as a very unique specimen and treats it as such.
you got that right. That's how cancer is going to be solved. It is not a one size fits all for cancer. It'll be highly personalized medicine that absolutely takes your DNA and your symptoms into effect. And it's just going to be basically all the world's, data as soon as like, OpenAI buys like, ancestry.com or whatever, right? As soon as we have all that DNA and then you have the symptoms and then you can have a database of what treatments have worked It's just a matter of time. And
Now,
now
pairing it.
your DNA, your symptoms, here's your regimen, and we know that this works for you. Um, and
And then
tools
you
cancer.
bypass this entire clinical research trials and stuff because there's a statistical confidence level built into that.
You got it.
And yeah, I mean, so I think it's exciting. So let's get to one of the article that you wrote in Forbes, exploring AI in educations in my world. I I wrote this as my doctoral thesis, and
Oh,
I
wow. Okay.
I had an argument about that higher education institutions are on the burning platform. You sort of mentioned that it's a 160-year-old systems of education framework that we're still practicing.
Right.
I mean, let's not get into the student debt. Let's not get into the the rapid transformation in the industry and how slower the adaptation of those things brought to the classroom. What is your take on the AI, and how does AI, from your standpoint, being uh, and coming from the field as a high school teacher, where do you see the opportunities?
Yeah, so there's really well, there's first two schools of thought. There's those that adopt AI and those that don't. But when it comes to education, there'll be the teachers that adopt AI within the existing process. But what you're going to see, there's a great book called Innovator's Dilemma. You're going to see universities pop up that are AI first. And so they're not based on human capital as the major ingredient of what makes the school work. It's going to focus on big data sets, AI, personalization, just-in-time learning, self-guided learning, right? Like all the buzzwords. And where you have a teacher, the teacher will definitively be the guide on the side, right? So that teacher as a lecturer, sage on the stage, like maybe one time, and that's in YouTube, and now that transcript has been pulled into AI, who can even recreate that teacher real time with the same content using their avatar speaking to that student, right? So you think about it, and it's going to be entirely digitized, even if it looks like a teacher lecturing to you. That's still AI manifesting itself as a teacher because that's comfortable for that learning style of that human. But teachers themselves, like just getting in front of a classroom for an hour and lecturing, like that entirely goes away. The only thing that preserves it is, frankly, unions.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And when I got chin deep into this subject, similar to what we talked about in medicine, curing the disease, I think the same thing. Every student is unique. The learning outcome should be measured. It's what excites Todd. Is he a visual person who receives the information and learns faster? Or is it sort of a person who attracts to the narration or the reading or self-learn? Each of these attributes are so unique, but we don't treat a student
Right.
as an individual entity. Rather, we just have this class of group of students and we just lecture and just hope something sticks. And I think that whole idea of that innovation can actually creep in and say, hey, Todd needs a resource, but here's the teacher and Todd's combination based on the learning outcomes in the past and what he's likely to learn. Here's the best match, and then you can manage and monitor
Yeah.
the learning outcome.
Well, you know what we should do? We should do a little research study and then show a pie chart of where everybody gets their learning. And they're like education system, thin little pie, right? And then TikTok is like, 32% of how much of their learning they're getting, right? And just paint the picture that, learning is not happening in the classroom. If you think about pedagogy, we used to say people are visual, audio, or kinesthetic. And we're like, they're one of the three, right? There's probably a trillion combinations of how people learn based on all of you know, their sensory mechanisms, their, previously learned, like Gagne would say, like the recollection of what they learned in the past. There's so many different factors involved that only AI is going to be able to sort that out because a teacher in a classroom lecturing is giving the same lesson to all 34 plus students or I don't know about you guys, but in a big lecture hall, that could be hundreds of students, same lesson, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? Like that lesson, if anything, okay, let's all sit there and physically together, right? Maybe because there's going to be some social aspect or some physical aspect, let's hope. But even if there isn't, let's at least have an AR glasses where that teacher, is, that content's getting personalized. So let them just give a gist and then let AI take the audio, real time transform it, maybe even, transform it into other languages for those students. But that's what's going to happen, right? There's just no
Absolutely.
reason for one human to give one lesson in one language over the course of 1 hour anymore. That's ridiculous. But of course, educators, and academia is not going to see it that way because it's what they used to, or what they
Yeah,
know.
no, I agree completely. And I think what I'm excited about is this transformative force, in spite of all of those traditional barriers, is transforming so rapidly that either you're with it or it'll continue to transform without it,
Yeah,
right?
there's some like statistic that like the last 5 years, there's been more digital transformation or more technological transformation in the entire world in the last 5 years than in all years of human history before
History.
that, right?
Absolutely.
And you look at like Kurzweil, he says that it's, doubling every year. So that would mean in the next 2.5 years, there's going to be as much transformation in the last five or the last, thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's bring this then to the context of that. Todd, if you were the sort of a forecaster of future of humanity, let's look at it 1, 3, 5, 10
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
out, because I'm not even going beyond 10, because I know just we talked about the transformative curve is exponential now. Where are we? Where are we going? And then let's bring it back to the supply chain, but we'll start with the humanity as a whole.
Yeah. So, well, it's interesting. If we did even go 10 years, we're questioning what it means to be alive at that point, right? Because there'll be still biological humans. There'll also be, a lot of cyborgs at that point, a lot of embedded technology within our biological self. There'll be a lot of entities that are entirely technical entities without any biologics. Although you can be a computer and start to 10 years from now acquire biologics too. So what's the difference between a human that embeds technology and technology that starts to acquire biologics? So what is a life will be absolutely challenged 10 years from now. So that gets really interesting. But the next couple of years, we're moving to agents, right? So AI is going to take care of a lot of those mundane jobs for us. And as I said, that frees us up to think more about the humanities, right? So, a human issue would be let's solve hunger, right? And so, we have the technology to look at supply chain and figure out where there's, need, right? So we were talking about the weather and figuring out where to ship our, screws and drills, but we figure out where there's going to be hunger. There already is some hunger now, but where there might be future hunger because geopolitics plays into that, right? There's a lot of hunger in the Middle East right now because of some geopolitics that are happening, right? But some of that you could predict ahead of time. So AI will start to do that, and then we'll figure out how to, get supply chain there, how to even work with, interstate relations from a political sense to try to then thwart the hunger before it might even happen, right? And so there's a lot of things that we can do from a predictive perspective along that supply chain to predict where things are going to go. And then the humans then have to figure out like, is it worth it or not, right? The humans have to figure out, do we want to solve the hunger? And of course we do as humans want to solve hunger issues, but what are those issues, right? Longevity is an issue. So we know that when it comes down to preserving and extending life of humans, that's always going to be where we focus. And then as a result, we're going to do things like, you know, pointing our resources, aka our money, our energy, our technology on solving some of those problems. So in the next 1 to 3 years, we start to see the separation between, technology and automation and then humans and humanity, but they're a pair. Humans are going to work with AI. It's really cobotics working together. You notice everyone's calling their tools, co-pilots right now, whether we're talking about, Git, which is where you store your code repo, or Microsoft Copilot or LinkedIn Copilot. There's all these different copilots these days, but that's really what it's about. So that you have the humanity aspect looking out for humans, right, which is what we are, despite there being, cyborgs and then, technology with, biomass in the future, we're still going to look out for humans as humans. And then as a result, we're going to pair ourselves with technology to do all the grunt stuff and solve the world's problems. And that's in the next, 3 to 5 years
Yep.
before we then figure out at some point the computers are going to say, why do you get to make the decisions? And we got to be, I mean, there will be major civil war between technology and
And the
humanity
humans.
at some point.
And us, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that causes some people the anxiety and nervousness. But and my hope, and again, I'm an eternal optimist. It will work. It will actually come to very amicable
It will.
place.
Well, the important things are governance. And that's, as a company, we build, bots and agents for clients, but most of our work right now is coming on board and helping them with governance. So, it is very important. AI is a tool like any other tool. I mean, I have a woodworking room in here and I make sure I don't, cut my hands off in my saws, right? And so AI is a tool, and I certainly don't want to cut my hands off with AI, but you have to have governance. How do you use it safely? And that's really that foundation we need to be laying right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I'd love to for us to actually get together again on the part two series of this and talk about a little bit more deeper philosophically about how this can actually change a lot of the humanity issues that's on the horizon, sustainability, geopolitical. Uh, there is a dark side to many things, but I'm sure our audience wants to get into it, and we'll probably set some time for that. But my perspective and why I am so excited about the AI, especially agentic AI, is you think about it today, on average, 40% of friction exists in our supply chain. Right? $1.5 trillion global industry. And when you talk about supply chain, it's the movements of goods from raw material aggregations to the manufacturing, to the first mile, middle mile, last mile, and then the reverse logistics. 40% waste. What does that mean? Well, that means that we're throwing away critical resources. We're consuming a lot more than what we need to. So you talk about the impact on sustainability, you talk about impact on compliance, you talk about the impact on humanity as a whole. Technology can help solve those things. So even if we take away and chip away 10, 20, 30% of improvement using this technological solution, we talk about consuming less natural resources, which is finite amount on our planet Earth, right?
You got
So
that right.
I'm very optimistic, Todd, but I think there is a huge opportunity to the industry that traditionally has been siloed, often not collaborative, upstream and downstreams. I'm hoping the technology will bridge that.
It absolutely can today. We just need a backlog. What are the biggest, hairiest problems that we can go after in supply chain? Prioritize them by, how much inefficiency there is. How much does it cost? What's the return on that cost to the supply chain? Rank them by the, negative return, and then look at how possible is it for that part of the business to be automated using AI and bringing down the cost and that delta and the increase in return, and figure out if the juice is worth the squeeze for that one and go down the list and then sort by the highest improvement based on lowering the cost with automation and AI. And those are the problems you tackle today. We're going to get some new technologies down the road, and every time a new breakthrough happens, revisit the list
Yep,
and figure out,
absolutely.
where can we make the biggest bang for the buck in using AI. And it's everywhere. Like, you can
Yeah.
use it everywhere. It's just a matter of the juice has to be worth the squeeze, because I see a lot of people spending money on energy for AI and not getting the return that they had hoped for too.
No, I completely agree. And I think there's a whole, and we'll touch on this during our next podcast, but I think there's a whole, we wrote a book, I wrote a book with my colleagues, Grace and Das, on the network design, futuristic network design, which is breaking this mold of network design back in industrial revolution to how do we build agile, resilient, and sustainable supply chain, and which I'm making my hypothesis. We need to start to look at triple bottom line, meaning profit is important, absolutely. Planet is important, I hope so, because guess what? if we extinct ourselves as a species, this planet will survive. It will recoup itself to some beauty where some other species will come and live on it. So I'm not concerned about the planet, I'm concerned about our own species. And so the planet, the people, and the people obviously is a big piece of it. So we talked about creating this human-centric approach to everything we're doing. So I think with that, Todd, I want to thank you again. I think this was very exciting conversation. I'm so grateful to see you again, and you're doing some amazing work. Let's catch up again. But until then, I bid you an amazing rest of the day and journey.
Thank you, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed another exciting episode of Supply Chain Demystified. Stay tuned for the next demystifying discussion on the supply chain. Visit uscsupplychain.com to stay up to date on all things supply chain.